Good morning. My name is Alan Saunders. I'm the Director of Education for the Center for Leadership and Character Education. Philbert Seeker from the Ivory Coast is the founder of the organization. Today, we'll be talking about mental health and character education. And we have many excellent presenters, including Reverend Dr. Sandra Lowen, Dr. Kathy Winings, Poppy Ritchie, and myself. To begin this morning, I would like to invite up Dr. Mose Durst, who is considered the grandfather of character education for most of us in the US. He is a prolific writer. He's a founder of the Principled Academy and a very wonderful friend who has coached and mentored me for many, many decades. Dr. Durst, the floor is yours, sir.
Yes, good morning. Good. Thank you so much. There's a lengthy essay in last week's New York Times entitled, "Kids' Mental Health is a National Emergency." The therapists are in short supply, but the essence of the article is there are lots of books and articles, podcasts, and so forth that can help parents and teachers who feel frightened about the depression and other maladies that their children have. So in essence, there is a greater need for therapists that can deal with children's depression, especially, which seems to be a major aspect of what's happening in our country. As a teacher of middle school kids, I realized when we were just Zooming, kids were not communicating with each other, and you could see that they were hurting in a lot of ways. Descartes' famous line, "Cogito ergo sum," I think, therefore I am, is wrong. That basically character education teaches us that we are built for relationship. And through relationship, we experience love and care, community, empathy, and so forth. That without community, without relationship, without building, we are built to connect with each other in such a way that we develop our intellect, our emotional capacity, and our community. And even the book I wrote recently, How Families, Schools, and Communities Raise Good Children. In the book, there are short essays that point you to various books and other kinds of material that can help parents and teachers. We're not blindfolded, even though the tragedy is there are so few therapists that deal with issues of children's depression. It's so clear to me that when the kids came back to school, they just fell in love with each other. They were isolated for so long, and it was serious situations. I could see the kids were hurting when I could see them on a Zoom, but they were hurting because they weren't connecting with each other. So through the character education ideal is that through relationship, we build value and we overcome the loneliness, the failure to connect with each other. I think, as adults, we see that if we're alone for too long, if we're not working in relationship to a purpose, we feel disconnected from our community. Certainly with children, it's tragic because suicides have gone up with young people. They don't sense that they are valued. On social media, it's very simple that kids feel disconnected from each other, even though they're connecting on social media. What I emphasize in the book especially is that families can do a lot to provide the caring and loving environment to help young children. They don't have to be absent parents, even though in fact, the reality is that so many parents have to work, both husband and wife, and children are left alone after 4 o'clock when they come home from school. So the parents can do a lot. Teachers can be mentors. My own experience in driving to school is I don't listen to the radio. I pray for each of the children in my class so that when I get there, I don't have my emotional baggage. In other words, I have to be clear myself as a teacher when I enter the classroom so that I can be best when I interact with the children, not carrying my baggage with them and my emotion and so forth. So there's a process that parents can do. There's a process that teachers can do. And the importance of community. We often talk about the Principled Academy, small school, big community. And that's what we have to work at all times, not just the school community, but also the larger community, whether it be the Boys and Girls Club or the the Boys Club, the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, and so forth. There are many organizations within the larger community that parents can connect to. So parents don't have to feel that they are trapped. They can understand their children by books and are very helpful. And I mentioned numerous books in my book, so that parents and teachers can use these resources. They don't have to feel trapped with not knowing what they can do with their child because there's no therapist. So families can do a lot, teachers can do a lot, and community organizations can do a lot in helping to draw children out of themselves and to give them a sense that there is meaning, there's purpose, there's joy in all of their activities. So that, in summary, that's my experience both as a teacher and dealing with children who they may not, quote, have mental problems, but they are suffering in many ways, and we can provide the support that they need to overcome whatever the significant maladies are, even though we're not experts in mental health.
Thank you very much, Dr. Durst. He has so much wisdom, so much experience, so much knowledge in teaching and educating, in raising up so many wonderful teachers and young people. And I strongly recommend his book that we placed in the chat. It's available on Amazon. It has a lot of gems in there. He has been a wonderful coach for me and for Poppy and others. Our next speaker is Reverend Dr. Sandra Lowen, who has a Master's of Social Work, a PhD, is a licensed clinical social worker with more than 30 years experience as a clinical trauma and relationship therapist, and employing a variety of healing modalities in a number of client settings. She holds certification in sexology, suicidology, grief work, children, marriage, family, veterans, and other fields. She has also been a professor of English as a second language in Argentina, Bridgeport, Connecticut, where she served also as a professor of media, society, English, oratory writing in several community colleges, and has worked as an adjunct social work advisor at SUNY Albany, Adelphia, and NYU. She's given many presentations to 721 Day, worked very extensively in the performing arts, and has lectured economics and apartheid presentations for the Khalsa movement in IOWC. She's an ordained minister since 72, has maintained a private therapy practice since 92, specializing in couples, family, and group therapy, and has conducted many marriage seminars throughout the US. And most importantly, she's a proud parent of one young son and 2 grandsons. Dr. Lowen, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you very much. First of all, good morning, everybody. I know this is a topic that, as Dr. Durst has explained, is very, very important to all of you. And I hope that I can offer something that will be enlightening to you. And any questions that you have, certainly, please feel free to bring to our Q&A and other sessions in a little bit. I'm going to do mostly slides here because you now know what I look like. And considering that I have just gone through people teaching me how this is done, we're going to see if we can't get our slideshow going here. So I'm sharing my screen. And hopefully and ideally, you are seeing everything that I have.
Yes, we do.
Great. All right. So what we're looking at is, how do we raise children of light in a very dark time? We have 3 major things that are going on right now. They preceded, of course, the whole pandemic situation, but that has truly exacerbated all that our young people are going through. These are, first of all, stress. The second is anxiety, and the third is depression. These are the symptoms that are plaguing us right now. We know certain things from what we are experiencing we have the question, are we going to live tomorrow? If I pass someone on the street, is that person going to give me some terrible disease? As we have watched religion decline in this age, we see that people are anxious about their futures and they don't see a way to overcome the stresses that they're dealing with. When you put these stresses and these anxieties together, what one comes up with is depression. So what is fueling these things is that we have an uninstalled or an improperly installed moral compass. We also have a forced isolation because of the pandemic and other things. And we find that many of our young people have gone through traumas. I watched my grandchildren's video games the other day. They have one where you break your bones, and the idea is to break a bone through some kind of traumatic action. Or we have situations in which one goes into a scary room and has to fight off demons and so on. He's 7. And these are the videos that are available to him. So if this is how we are nurturing our children, we need to take a second look at what nurturance is all about. Now, of all of the psychological programs that are out there and the modalities that there are, the one that I ascribe the most to is Ericksonian, which involves a man and a woman who came together as a therapeutic couple, and they have developed how we grow. They have 8 stages of psychosocial development. I'm going to look at the first 6 because these are the ones that come closest to letting us know what we are going through. And if I press the right button here, let's see. Well, I may not press the right button here. Let's see what we can do. There we go. We find that we're actually climbing a stair step in terms of our development. Most of us are so excited when we have the baby. The baby is wonderful, and we expect it to grow to be an adult pretty much like the plants outside our windows grow. But there actually are things and tasks that each child has. The first task that we go through, and the thing that we have to absolutely conquer in our childhood, is trust. We have to become trusting of our environment. If for some reason we don't receive the adequate food, nurturance, warmth, in the first 28 days of life, we will turn our heads to the wall and die. I had a job at one point in my early childhood, which involved my just going to a hospital and playing with children. The idea was to go beyond the basic nurturance that they were receiving to the point that they were able to interact with another human being. Now, there's a virtue to be gotten out of being a trusting person. That virtue is that we develop hope. Hope in what? Hope that there is something beyond ourselves, something to look forward to in life. If you were a baby and just left in a crib where somebody comes by every 8 hours and puts something in your mouth that is nurturance, you're not going to prosper. Freud looked at this and called it the oral stage. We need our basic needs met. The second stage is the stage of autonomy or doubt or shame. And this is the point at which we're in an anal position. Most of what is happening to us through the middle of our bodies. Very interesting, because this is the point at which a child at 2 or 3 is learning to control himself, learning to control what comes out of his body. So if a parent takes the child aside and says, "Bad boy, look at you, you just wet your pants," or "Bad girl, look at you, you just pooped your pants," what does the child feel? It's an inconvenience for the parents and quickly forgotten. But for the child, something tells him or her, wow, I'm a bad person. I can't even control myself. And then this trust that he has nurtured becomes questionable. Now the child goes to another stage. He gets into a stage in which he is starting to go to school or preparing for school, I'm sorry. Now he is looking at, am I able to do things? You know that parent that you say to the child, oh, Harry, you're so cute. How old are you? And mother goes, he's 5, he's 9, he's 17, he's 42. Mom answers or dad answers or someone else answers and the child doesn't get to speak up. Then if I can't take initiative, if I can't go beyond that me do it and push you away, I start to feel like a failure. I'm a failure at 4 or 5 years old because I can't answer for myself. We go to school. At school, we're expected to do certain things. We're expected to learn how to read, learn how to write, learn how to do this and that. So what happens when the child comes home with his D report card and his older sister comes home with her A report card, and mom turns to her son and says, why can't you learn like your sister? Why are you so dumb? Working in the school system, I heard teachers say, you're so stupid to children. And of course, there was always that mother that came into my office and I congratulated her son on having made the honor roll for the first time in his life. And his mother said to the child, yeah, but you know, he's going to be worthless just like his father. Don't expect anything out of him. Then how did the child feel that mother had labeled him with that destiny? What is the essential thing about these steps? If I miss one, I do not progress beyond making it up. So if my basic trust never forms, no matter how well I do in school, no matter how well I do later in life, there is a place where I need trust before I'm able to go forward. Therefore, we start running into issues. The child that overeats, if indeed the thing that we are supposed to learn as children or as infants is that we can be nurtured, then when we start getting into that stage in which we are not being nurtured, we don't trust the world. So what do? We start eating. What happens when we can't deal with our autonomy? When that's not done, then sometimes we start becoming the people that control others. As you can see, we can go on and on with this so that ultimately we are not developing those virtues that we should be developing. So if first I should develop hope, then once I'm able to develop my autonomy, I should have the will to go forward, the will to live. And of course, if I can develop beyond that initiative and guilt, then I should have a purpose in my life. In that stage 4, we're developing our competence to feel that I can do anything. I can take the lessons I learned here and I can apply them here and good things will happen. In stage 5, I start identifying with the world. I start looking at mom and saying, I want to be like her, or looking at dad and saying, I want to be like him. When there is role confusion, we start to see people wondering whether or not they are this or that. So if I am a boy and I'm being raised in an all-male household or in an all-female household, I'm going to be interested in the things my mother is interested in. If it's a single mother, she may be more interested in men. then where will my interest fall? This is putting it very simplistically, but I think you get the idea. The next stage that we are going to be concerned about, and there are two other stages that go into maturity and into actually take us right up to the last days of our lives. But stage 6, which is our adolescent and our young person, is developing intimacy, is learning how to love something, learning how to love another person, learning how to realize that there's a world beyond, which involves me. And when that doesn't happen, I can easily isolate. Then what have our young people been going through over these last several 2 or 3 years has been that they have been forcibly forced into some kind of isolation that was not planned, was not of their own making, and from which in many cases they can't escape. If we divided childhood into certain stages, we realize that from 0 to 7, we've got a lot to do. Have you ever thought about the fact that you don't teach your child how to talk? Most of us talk baby talk to our children. Is baby cutie, looky little face, he's so sweet. But that child manages somehow to learn more than one language pretty perfectly by the time he's 7. He learns how to walk, he learns how to roll over, he learns to hold on to things and not let go. Then he learns how to let go. Very important, especially in certain times back in our more primitive history, when some animal might be dragging you through the jungle because you can't let go of him. We learn how to mimic, we learn how to control our bowels. You can read the list. All of you grew up, I think, reading. So as we learn to socialize, we go into the next phase. Very important, especially when you start looking at things like bullying and other issues that come up for our young people. Then ultimately, we start to learn about ethics. We start to learn the morality and the self-care and the self-awareness, and we identify with the gender, and we start looking for the things that that gender wants. Then what's the issue that comes up for us? I'm a strong proponent of, what can we call it, rites of passage, that every age should have something that tells the child, you have accomplished this. It used to be that you had a time in which you went off into the woods and you killed your animal, or you got a name from the universe, or you did your 7-day fast and you went off and learned something about the universe that you could bring back to your tribe or your group. Or you were declared a man in the temple and you were able to enter into the company of men officially. Or you had a party, a quinceañera or something that said, you are now entering womanhood. But we don't deal with those types of things now. Now we are dealing more with rituals that our own children create because they don't have anything official that says you are older. So what happens? The rituals that they create for themselves. Okay, now I'm old enough to drink. Now I'm old enough to have sex. Now I'm old enough to impregnate a woman. Now I'm old enough to have a baby. And these are, in many ways, negative things that we don't want to see with our children. But why they are happening to us is that we don't have those ideal rites of passage that help them. So many parents say, well, what's my responsibility? I don't have the time to do this. I send them to vacation Bible school. I send them to some kind of camp. I send them to the YMCA or the YWCA. They're supposed to teach them, right? You do that one time a year. And very few of us realize that this education is ongoing. Because the education that is coming from outside that is negative education is ongoing. And our children are constantly learning from that particular school things that perhaps we don't approve of their learning. So what promotes this kind of anxiety? As I've said, when there is not bonding, the child can feel neglected. Most of our children nowadays are being raised by caretakers from infancy, not their mothers. And this can lead to the child feeling neglected. We talked about the shaming over things like toileting. And when the parent gets too busy because, golly, I've got to get the wash on, I've got to get dinner on, I've got to get this and that and this and that, then mom or dad just takes over the difficult tasks. It's taking you too long to get dressed, so I'll dress you. In our world, we have to teach our children certain things, but sometimes we're overly cautious. We teach them that there is danger everywhere. And if there's danger everywhere, how can I explore? How can I go out and learn things? We went to a program once where everybody got a medal, even though it was a competition. We can't have losers because it'll make the children feel bad. Sometimes we have to learn how to lose. And sometimes when we lose, or we do the wrong thing, or we don't get it right, our family just rejects us. Again, in competition, sometimes our children get bullied. Sometimes they get bullied even when they're not competing. And of course, the question of what is right and what is wrong. Too often, we allow the consensus of peers rather than our own ethical teachings to govern where and how our children will act as they are growing and getting a little beyond us. So we see the elements of stress, the isolation, the environmental instability, political uncertainty, the intellectual insecurity. I'm sure you've all heard about children who kill themselves because they didn't get into certain colleges. The social and peer pressure, which we've mentioned, and the rise of lethal diseases. That I can walk down the street and somebody can cough on me and all of a sudden I've got a disease that might land me in the hospital. What is monkeypox? Is it true that polio is coming back? These are the things that our children worry about that are at the very heart of their existence. I'm not going to do the case studies. But it's good for all of us to feel comfortable in our skin. Still, there are factors that affect us. So my age, I'm too young to do things. I watch our 7-year-old follow behind the almost 10-year-old, and he watches them and he wants to do what they can and they can't. And that bothers him, gives him a picture of maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. So it becomes important for parents not to feel, oh, well, the children all have to do the same thing, but to actually recognize a difference in their ages. What are their abilities and disabilities? I had a little girl that was brought to me because she was not doing well in school. And her mother said to me, she's not doing well in school. The child said to me, I don't understand it. I'm up 3-4 hours a night doing my homework. And I even stay up sometimes all night. I looked at the child and all I had to do was look at her because I do diagnosis. And I recognized this is a child who has Downs. She has something that will not allow her to learn. It's not that she won't learn, she can't learn. And when we did her full scale IQ, it was 52. Normal is 100. She was doing the best she could. It was only when we could inform the parents of that and get her the schooling she needed that she could feel better about herself. Genetics. There are things that may be coming about simply because of what we inherit from family. Our health. We know that every child is not born perfectly healthy. Every child can't run 50 yards or whatever, do a 100-yard dash within 4 seconds or whatever the timing is. The society into which we are born. what comes for us in terms of who is raising us and the people around us, what they expect of us? Do we measure up? Our own thoughts and feelings, and again, our personality types. Not everybody is an extrovert. Not everybody is a good listener. Not everybody can dance. Not everybody can do these things. So we have to learn and really study our children to find out what kinds of people are they. So it becomes important that we restore the moral compass. When I talk to parents about moral compass, they say to me, well, what does that mean? I take them to church. But a part of moral compass is learning by example. So if mom and dad want me to be a calm and peaceful person, but they're screaming at each other at the dinner table, or not talking, or talking in very negative ways about each other, how will my child respond? Children are the biggest mirrors in the world. The socialization and increased communication that we require means quality time. Even if mom and dad are both working overtime because we've got to stay in that big house, we've got to pay that mortgage, we've got to do whatever we need to do. Still, we require talking to our children. Putting a roof over their head and food in their mouths has pretty much for the 16-year-old the same impact that it has for the infant. We still need that eye contact. We need to know that we are loved. We need to know that somebody cares about us, because if I am not caring for my child, there are plenty of people out in the world that will care for my child, but in ways that might not be what I want for my child. When I talk to girls who have left their homes or become entangled with someone that is unsuitable, their usual comment to me is, well, I was lonely. I didn't feel that my parents were there for me. And of course, the easement of trauma issues. Sometimes we don't accept who our children are. Sometimes we don't listen when they tell us, I have a problem with this person or that place that I go. We need to listen, we need to support, we need to understand, and we need to discuss. So I may not like what you're doing. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how I feel. Let's talk about how you feel and why you want to do things that way. And let's accept and understand each other. This becomes the most important thing. But if we talk to our children way back as they're growing up, we start to learn what they are like, what things might be issues for them. We learn to nip things in the bud that are going a little bit awry. And understanding that kind of support then becomes what we need. So just as it's hard for us to expect a young person to grow up well in a home where there's trauma or where there's violence or where he's exposed to it or she's exposed to it in their video games or the things that are going on the internet, so we need to be a bit of a policeman. And we need to let them understand why. That doesn't mean going through their phones every night or searching their rooms. It does mean asking them to share their wants and their needs with us so that we can be a part of their experience and they can experience with us why our values are important. And they can choose those values that they want to be a part of them. So, in conclusion, I would say this. Each one of us receives no less than 180,000 negative messages directed directly at us or around us by the time we're 18 years old. Someone is telling us we have a problem. There was that Rolling Stones song. I turn on my TV and some guy tells me that how white my shirt should be, but I can't be a man because I don't smoke the same cigarettes as he, or whatever. But so there are messages that are coming to our children, telling them you're not good enough. Then what's our responsibility? To let them know they are better and counteract some of those 180,000 messages. We know that 1 in 20 people before the pandemic were experiencing clinical depression. And 1 in 4 people are suffering some form of depression at any given time. That means we're not feeling good about ourselves. That means we need to be loved, we need to be cared for. And when people say to me, well, what do I need? Skin is the answer. We need skin touch with each other.
Mm.
We require 16 hugs a day.
Mm.
We need to be touched. And that touching should come from our parents, ideally. So let's hug our children. Let's talk to our children. Let's look them in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
And let us take a look at our institutions, the people around them, to make sure that their environments are as safe as we can make them. We can't do much about what is going on in the world toward health and so on, but we're at that point that we can raise children who can get out of any kind of depression by being more alert and by referring them as we can. So that is my basic talk, and I've got a slide that has my address and, or rather my email information if you have further interest. I'd like to thank you for listening and looking forward to the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Lowen. It is really true. Skin touch is a really important element. You gave an excellent presentation there. The amount of depression and suicide that is in the US internationally, it's noteworthy to mention that we had 80,000 deaths of despair and suicides last year alone, which is more than the whole amount of deaths during Vietnam War over 10 years. So we have serious work to do, and it's just not in society, it's in every facet of society, and it's also spreading now a lot internationally. I have relatives in Australia, one who has attempted suicide, another who has witnessed for suicide. So it's a serious situation. It's not just in any suburban or urban area, it's all over the country. It's every socioeconomic group. And we need to look very seriously as this. As have a lot of athletes and actors and actresses now beginning to talk about it more. And it's becoming more clear that we can actually talk about it. So thank you again, Dr. Lowen. Our next speaker, Dr. Kathy Winings, has been a wonderful educator and friend for over 40 years. She is the executive director of IRFF. She has been the former dean of UTS, one of my exemplary professors. And she has been a very, very good friend. And she will be speaking on understanding mental health through the neurosciences. And this is not just what she had experienced, but she has personal experiences of that. Dr. Winings, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Lowen. I want to continue in a sense from where Sandra ended, in that sense that we're linking nicely. And I'm going to take a different tact. I want to look at mental health from the perspective of the brain, because our brain has two constants. One constant is the power of the emotions and the social brain. That's one constant. They are central to the functioning of our brain. Central. And our brain, the second constant is that fact that our brain functions because of the natural chemicals and electricity that allows our brain to work. And when both of these constants work in harmony, we have great mental health. Actually, they support mental health. That is why neuroscience is an extremely important resource when it comes to mental health issues. By understanding our brain and how it functions best, we can support good mental health in our teens and our youth, as well as become a great resource to help during a mental health crisis. We can nip a mental health crisis in the bud with understanding of the brain. And that's what I want to touch on briefly today, because there are two ways of understanding the brain to help us with that. But we can also see the devastation that it can, by not understanding the brain, it can cause. So if we look at the brain, emotion is a critical part of the working of our brain. The brain develops through an active and dynamic process of our social, emotional, and cognitive or thinking experiences organized over time. Each major section of the brain is connected to emotion. And as we'll see in a moment, it's no surprise that the dictum, the eyes are the window to our soul. It is so true. It's much more than that. The eyes are the window to our personality and to our mental health. Now, our social brain includes a multitude of circuitry, all designed to attune to and interact with another person's brain. That's how we were created. And this is one of the newer areas of neuroscience. Within the last 10 years, we have begun to focus on new data. And much of what Sandra talked about, we now have the data, not just assumptions, but data that proves everything she talked about, hardcore data. And the most important function within the brain in the presence of what we call mirror neurons or cells are key. They act as a neural Wi-Fi, if you want to call it that, to connect us with another brain. And they're located throughout the brain. In fact, the mirror neurons is the newest area that are being studied and connected to the autism network, the autism process, to understand what its role is in the spectrum, along the autism spectrum, not as a sole issue, mind you, but what role it plays. Is it the lack of mirror neurons? Is it damage in the mirror neurons? Or is it a decrease, which plays a role in the various aspects of the different forms of autism? So mirror neurons stimulate and they activate what we see in the other person. So emotion, movement, intention, all of this is what our brain is reading. And if you note then, this has incredible implications for mental health. And this is why emotional subtext in interactions are as important as overt experiences. So mirror neurons give us the ability to form relationships. And early bonding experience with parents affects our social brain. So it's what Sandra was talking about, critical. And later experiences will modify this. So positive experiences will enhance our sense of well-being, while negative ones will have the opposite impact. If any of you are familiar with some of the studies that have been coming out of studying the orphanages in Romania after the Ceausescu regime, remember the hundreds of babies that were warehoused in these all these scientific orphanages during that period of time, where they had no relationship with except for the caregivers and minimal relationships. But what happened is when they were being adopted by many American parents, by the time these children reached the tween stage, 10 and 11 and 12, they had serious issues of relating because their social brain, their emotional dynamics could not relate. They had serious relational problems because they had no early bonding experiences with parents, no skin touch experience with significant adults, let alone parents. So compassion and loving relationships are good for the teen brain. Data coming out of Spain, the UK, Sweden, and the United States now are showing very clearly that this is critical for positive mental health. And it's a way to stave off depression, social anxiety, and other mental health issues. The data does not lie. In contrast, insensitivity and selfishness are harmful for the teen brain and for mental health. The data has been irrefutable in this area. Now, the other issue is what we call the orbital frontal cortex. And in a moment, I'll show you a slide of the brain. It sits just behind our eyes. Now, again, the eyes are the window to the soul. More than that, it develops very early in our brain, and it helps us process emotion. It sits just behind our eyes. This is not by luck or happenstance, it's by design. It regulates emotions better if teens have trusting, again, as Sandra talked about, trusting, supportive relationships. If a child and then a teen has developed these supportive relationships, then that frontal cortex, that orbital frontal cortex, can help them in their emotional life. It strengthens that ability and it thrives on close relationships. That is a sign for developing strong support for good mental health in teens. That should give us all a hint in how to protect teens for mental health, how to stave off mental health issues, or to give them tools to help address potential mental health issues, how to address them. So let's look at teens and issues of depression and what the brain tells us. So let's look at the brain here. In depression, there are key areas inside the brain that are involved. In depression, the amygdala, which is right here, that little green spot, right above at the top of the brain stem, that's the fight or flight center. You know, when you're in a dark street and you're not sure what to do, you're scared, that's what's stimulated first. That's a really emotional core of our body, of our brain. The amygdala, the hippocampus, which is right under it. It's like a kind of horseshoe kind of thing that flows right under the amygdala. there's the hippocampus. You have the medial prefrontal cortex, which is this area, okay, which is in a teen, which is being developed. That's the second greatest growth period in the brain for the teens, is this whole prefrontal cortex, the seat of their personality. Emotional and social development is the focus. This is why they become risk takers. This is the hormones are flowing. They're up and down. If you ever have had teens, right? You know, they do crazy things. They're tired, they're high, they're this. You often wonder what they're on, right? Sometimes they do nutty things. It's because their decision-making is being formed. All right, so that's affected. What's called their nucleus accumbens is being formed, which is this little area right here, and their insula, which is, I'll get my little marker here, right here. What does the nucleus accumbens do? Nucleus accumbens is critical. It helps them process motivation, rewards. Dopamine is stimulated naturally. It also is positive reinforcement. It's significant role in addiction, in addressing addictions. The insula, that little yellow spot right here, it deals with self-awareness as well as addiction. These are critical parts of the brain, right in the center and right behind this orbital cortex. Now, the challenge here is our brain naturally produces serotonin naturally, which is good because we need that. That helps us keep happy, keeps us feeling good, and helps us to address issues and stress. But our brain is particularly sensitive to cortisol. And when we're stressed, that chemical is generated. So when a teen feels stressed, that cortisol will come out. Now, if it's not short-term stress, the serotonin will help deal with it. And hopefully with their good relationship, their brain is developed to help them deal with those relationships, you know, those challenges and that stress, it will go away. They'll deal with it in a healthy manner. But if not, the cortisol continues to flow. Cortisol is corrosive. It's sort of like an acid. It kills the brain neurons or damages them. Too much cortisol will degrade and cause atrophy in the brain parts that are essential. So let's look at this. Over time, parts of this hippocampus, which stores memory, creates memory. It also, the hippocampus is important because it helps fight, cortisol. It does many things for a healthy brain, but with too much cortisol will limit the ability of the hippocampus to work. So we lose memory, if that atrophies, if that organ atrophies, we lose memory, the ability to form memory. It cannot fight cortisol. And then more cortisol then is generated. You have a vicious cycle. And then the cortisol will then help atrophy the amygdala. It will also corrode other neurons in the brain. Now, our cells in the brain do up to about the age of 17, 18, and 25 will sort of grow in a sense. They assume, new jobs in that sense. That's what we call plasticity or growth. We don't create new cells. When you lose brain cells, you lose them. That's it, guys. But your existing cells will take on the work of that your brain needs to do. But the cortisol will destroy cells. Now, if your teen starts losing cells at that age, that's a problem. That's a problem that early in life. So you don't want to see that happen in a teen. You have this vicious cycle. We have so much cortisol, it damages their brain at that young age. And their brain is developing in this area up until they're actually 25. 25. So it's not, and depression is not something you want a teen to deal with long term. So understanding how they can deal with these things early and be equipped to do so is so much better. Now, the other way the brain can help a teen deal with mental health issues beyond the relationship issues through nutrition. Neuronutrition is becoming a second area of fascinating growth, and I'm bowled over with. As you can see, I love neuroscience, so I'm a little bit geeky in this area. But nutrition is another area that we can help our youth and arm them against mental health issues, or give them tools to help them through issues. Our gut has its own nervous system and is often called our second brain. And as the largest storage system for serotonin in the body, actually 95% of the serotonin is stored in our gut. And the largest storage place, they work together, our brain and our gut. So the neuronutrition understands that our brain and gut microbes do communicate in a shared language. So these microbes can influence our emotions in the brain by sending signals to the brain, as well as the brain sending signals to the gut. I find this extremely fascinating. I mean, it was initially thought, decades ago, that if one was called a hypochondriac, it was all in their head. Well, in some ways, the answer is in the head and the stomach. In reality, there is a vital link between the brain and the gut. And it's clear that we can influence both through what we eat. And so questions are being studied now that include issues of depression, autoimmune, and metabolic disorders, and how the brain and the gut respond and can address them. So for example, diets low in animal fats and plants and high in sugar and enriched flours with chemicals and preservatives do not support brain health, as it reprograms our gut-brain microbe access. In fact, they're looking at, in many ways, it acts in a sense like morphine in our brain, and does not do our teen brain that good. That does not help. So what it boils down to is we can help our teens in addressing mental health issues and sort of arm them by going to something that's closer to a Mediterranean diet, according to neuroscience and neuronutrition, using fresh vegetables, legumes, beans, fruits, grains, plant fats such as olive oil, seafoods, omega-3s, things like that. I find this, if we look at neuroscience, has some ways to help support mental health for our teens. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Winings. You touched on a lot of very valuable research, and you tied it very nicely together with Reverend Dr. Lowen's talk. There are some chats in the questions in the chat that I would like your ladies to address. Maybe Dr. Lowen, the first one. What can we do to bring these points to the table in education? I know in character education, we'll discuss that with Dr. Durst in a minute, but how can these be brought into the table of education? Dr. Lowen, would you like to start? And then Dr. Winings?
I have long advocated for courses in raising children. A lot of times we deal with books, we deal with this type of program, but we actually need in the seat as much as possible classes in which we teach our people that are interested in this type of thing and raising good and healthy children, that it is not a willy-nilly process. If we can learn how to give the proper nutrition to our children, what our children require in terms of touching, what they require in terms of education, emotional and physical and experiential education, and so on, then it becomes very important that we, the parents, become the first educators. I don't want my child's teachers touching my child, even with good touch. So yes, what is done in the classroom does affect our family and does affect our community, but also what is done in the home is so important. And I'm a huge advocate of parents as educators, because the school system will do what the school system is expected to do, which is basically to educate one aspect of my child, the intellectual aspect. So yes, they can teach my child how to eat. They can teach my child certain levels of social interaction. But as we see right now, that requires home teaching so that the child goes to school knowing how to interact with others.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lowen. Yeah, one of the main elements of character education is actually creating a bond between teachers and parents, and even bringing parents into the classroom and working together, because it has to be a combined effort, especially in today's society, particularly in the urban areas where we have 80% of the children being raised by a mother or a grandmother, but also realizing that in society in general, 95% of families are dysfunctional. So we need to work together, and we need to raise up young people to become good spouses, good parents. I agree with you. Dr. Winings?
Oh, yes, I would agree in that sense. I've always been a proponent when I was teaching in the public schools and also in higher education, when I was training teachers, that I think the synergy between home and public school is critical. And I think it needs to happen, and that there are areas that the parents are critically involved in and need to be involved in. And there are things that the school can teach and that the home should teach. And in some courses, I know that there are a lot of content I introduced into UTS to train teachers and pastors also to be more aware of, in terms of mental health issues and how to include them in their work as well, that they were not aware of as well, to help them in their programs, to make a trinity, because that's what this country was founded on, was a trinity of education between school, home, and faith community.
And communities, yeah. And that's one of the main elements of character education, how we can work collaboratively. Dr. Durst, we have a question for you from Matt Goldberg. How do we create trusting communities? You're somewhat of an expert in this area. You're muted, sir. You're muted. You have to unmute. Dr. Durst, we can't hear you.
First, I'd like to acknowledge the importance of what has been presented this morning. It's really excellent material. It seems that what's necessary and what we're talking about is human excellence. Nobody's talking about that in the public schools, but human excellence is really what we're talking about. Character education is the overview of developing the intellect, the emotion, the will, Erickson's 8 stages of growth, so that a child becomes a healthy human being that can build good friendships, good families, and good communities. That's what we all need. You know, we need to be, as kids graduate from middle school and high school, I emphasize to them, if you're going on in your education, make sure you make good friends. Make sure your parents know what you're doing and talking about. They are the best educators. I emphasize in terms of homework that kids can talk to their parents about their homework. The parents know more than the teachers often in terms of these subjects. So the richness of the parents' life experience is very important. And of course, connecting young people with their friends and with the community. These have to be conscious ideals. What I like also is related to this is Covey's idea of 7 habits of highly effective people. He talks about a mission statement. A family should have a mission statement where parents sit down with kids and say, look, this is what we are about. This is what we represent. These are our values. These are our ideals. Let us all be accountable to this. It's interesting. A good friend, Christina Sayer, was talking to me the other day about, she has a number of her grandchildren that are staying with her for a while. And obviously there are things that come up in the course of a day where kids either do dumb things or they're not cleaning up their room or whatever. So she has a meeting with them. And in meeting with them, this I suppose is a response to Matthew's question, they have a meeting and they discuss about what things went wrong, what things went right. In the old days, in terms of even spiritual education, we used to have an actionizer center and talk about, well, this happened to me during the day. And then the person who is what we call the Trinity head would work with these people who could honestly say, look, here's what happened to me during the day. Do you have advice for me? And people would then give their own experiences as well as that central figure giving experience. So I think all of these are ways of building community, which is really also what we're about, different ways of talking about it. Spiritual community is necessary if people are going to grow maturely and spiritually. And it doesn't end. You know, here now, my wife and I are in the 80s, 90, you know, we're still talking about this happened to me during the day. A final remark, you know, in my spiritual life, in my prayers, I pray that I can be a loving person and exhibit the divine love that God exhibits. Every day I strive for that ideal, but I fail every day. And so in my repentance, I say to God, I'm sorry, I blew this one. I wasn't living up to your ideal of love. So my faith is that God is both a source of love and also an immediate source of forgiveness. When I ask for repentance and forgiveness at night, I assume that I can have the next day is a clear day and have another chance. And what I'm trying to do is tie in the spiritual growth with what both of these professors have talked about in terms of psychological health and health in terms of relationship, health in terms of the food we eat and so forth. It's necessary in character education to provide the overview, how all of these things work together in terms of human excellence. And I think people have been inspired to know that, well, yeah, I'm working toward human excellence rather than I got a C or a D or a B in my class last week. So those are the comments I'm trying to connect what we've heard so well this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Durst. There's a lot of confusion in religious communities that what can be said and cannot be said in schools. In the report that Dr. Durst did with Dr. Lacona, Smart and Good High Schools, which went to every single high school in America, The eighth element is how to develop a spiritual person based on the 3 life goals. We can talk about spirituality. We can't talk about religion. We can't talk about theology, but we can talk about spirituality. And in what Dr. Winings and Dr. Sandra Lowen's talking about, a lot of it was focused on not only the cognitive, but the social emotional. And that's the main area that we're trying to develop within character education. Also, Dr. Durst mentioned about a mission statement. One of the main elements in character education programs is to take a week in the first the beginning of school, and create a mission statement for the year. What do you want to do? And the teachers ask the students, what do you want to do? How much discipline do you want or don't want? And then it's a buy-in from there. Dr. Lowen and then Dr. Winings, before we go to the breakout, there's a question about cortisol. How much is too much? From Matt Goldberg. Go ahead, you're muted, Dr. Lowen.
Well, of course, we've all seen the ads in which our bellies are bloated and they say, oh, you got too much cortisol and now you take this and you take that. And this is really more Dr. Wining's area. But I say that by reducing the stress, because cortisol is, of course, a response partly to the stress and anxiety that we're feeling, by trying to reduce the stress around us, we lower the amount of cortisol. I don't think there is a question of too little cortisol, because obviously it's needed at some level, but certainly not to the point that we see it now, that it is corrosive, and that certain elements of us, our ability to reason, our ability to follow through with our actions, and these our ability to think of consequences for things are affected, means that something's wrong there, and it's certainly worth figuring out what it is.
Thank you, Dr. Winings.
Yeah, my shtick has always been in terms of the brain.
Yeah.
You know, our brain was designed to function appropriately, and you know, if we let it go and work as it should, and don't play with it in a sense, it goes well. But the problem is, as Dr. Lowen was talking about, we have a lot of stressors these days. And so it gets stuck on overload, and that's when we get into trouble. So it's being able to manage that. I think oftentimes we've also thrown our bodies into overload because we also bring in lots of different supplements, and we tend to go the OTC route, over the counter. And we start taking all this stuff, you know, because now it's being advertised on television. Try XXXX, and we do that. Oftentimes we go online and learn, and we don't ask a healthcare professional, and we don't know its effect on our brain, let alone our body and our gut. And we don't understand this axis either. And sometimes it has unintended consequences. And sometimes it will do things we're not sure of. So it's an interesting dilemma that we face, and we don't realize what it does to the cortisol in our brain, as well as our stomach. So we're a little out of whack sometimes. So yeah, it is needed. There's a certain amount needed. And I think Matthew's comment in the chat line was appropriate. But I think we have to really understand this field well. Anyone who would like to know more, they're free to email me, and I have some great resources that are not difficult. They're in layman's terms. If you want to know more about this, to understand how to pull this into balance, it's a question of balance.
Correct. And that's one of the biggest issues I find in education, from my experience of teaching 5th grade through 12th grade and college and postgraduate level. It's always a balance, and we tend to go one way or the other. Yeah. The problem that I see in education, it's all cognitive, and it's very little on the social emotional, and people are taking a lot longer to mature. You know, as Kathy said, the average age of for girls is 25, for guys is 35. So that's not a sexist comment. That's based on data and research. I would have disagreed with that 20 years ago, but I'm sorry, I've seen it. the reality is we have to help young people. So as you go into your breakout rooms, let's continue the discussion. I know many people have got a lot of questions. You'll either be with Dr. Lowen, Dr. Winings, Dr. Durst and I, or with Mrs. Poppy Ritchie. And you can discuss, ask questions. You have 20 minutes, you have plenty of time. We'll come back and we'll go into more research and more information about mental health from Poppy Ritchie. Thank you very much, all of you. The recording again, Pierre. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much for all the coordinators. We will have one more breakout session at the end of this talk by Poppy Ritchie. So coordinators, please be ready for that. Our next speaker is another good friend of mine. And my next question for your next breakout is, what age are we in? That's my question for you to think about. What age have we entered into? So our next speaker, based on the research and the discussion that we've had by these first two presenters and Dr. Durst, our next presenter is Mrs. Poppy Ritchie, who is a wife and mother of 3 children and 1 grandchild. She currently lives in Colorado with her husband, Jim, recently moved from California, has been a teacher administrator 25 years with Dr. Durst for 25 years teaching character education, and was a co-author of the Discovering the Real Me books that I'll put in the chat, which is a character education curriculum that Poppy and I have done character education workshops around the world and around the US for over 15 years. She is also a freelance writer and currently writing articles on education in the American Essence magazine. Mrs. Ritchie, the floor is yours, ma'am.
All right. Well, I'm learning so much. I'm taking so many notes from the sharings of Dr. Durst and Sandra and Kathy, who are so knowledgeable, and I'm really grateful for another, for all the information that they've shared so far. My task is just to share something about the resources and that are available for those of us who need to know more about mental health and addiction. Probably most of us have someone in our life with addiction and or mental health issues. If that's you, most likely you're already acquainted with the resources I'll be talking about. So this is for those who aren't yet familiar with all the support that is available to caregivers and those we're trying to help. I've used these resources myself, and I found them to be very, very helpful. I want to share briefly, first of all, about how I got interested in finding these resources. I became rather desperate when a family member started having some problems years ago. And that led me to look for answers and support. Through my research, I discovered Al-Anon, an organization for those who have a family member or friend suffering from the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction as well. As I attended Al-Anon meetings and learned more, I found ways and resources to deal with my challenge at that time. Attending Al-Anon support groups also supported healing for me from past experiences. I realized that many of my own life struggles actually came from growing up with alcoholism in the family. My dad was an alcoholic, and my mom was stressed out most of the time because of that. So I've gained many tools in healing as well from past experiences with through Al-Anon. When a family member or friend suffers from mental and emotional health problems and or addictions, it is important to find qualified support groups with experienced facilitators for you as a caregiver, family member, or friend, and for the person who is struggling. If he or she is cooperative and willing to get help, which in many cases they're not willing to get help, but it's good for you as a caregiver to get the help you need. Mental health services are often covered on one's health insurance plan, and these plans can provide access and coverage for therapists and support groups. And then this kind of goes along with what both Sandra and Kathy were sharing about the importance of relationships. So that is why being in a support group where you can talk about what's going on is so important. When professional help is needed for both the family member who's sick and the caregiver, it's important to take action as soon as possible, and look into what your health insurance can provide and many resources beyond that. So three of the more well-known, I'll share a little bit about three of the more well-known resources for addiction and mental health challenges. And they all involve being part of a group and talking about what's going on. So the first one is very well known. Alcoholics Anonymous provides mentoring and support groups using the 12-step program. And then Al-Anon, with which I'm familiar, and Alateen, which is specifically for teenagers who are dealing with maybe parents who are alcoholics or relatives. These are outreach programs for those who are suffering because a friend or a family member is drinking. Their website, the Al-Anon website, will help you navigate the resources and connect with local meetings, and we'll be providing that list of resources for you on the website. So it's suggested that you attend a few meetings before you make a judgment whether or not this is good for you, the Al-Anon meetings. And if possible, talk to someone who's already attending meetings. Because at first it's a very structured kind of discussion, but the structure's there for a very good purpose so that people can experience deep listening when they share about their situation. So there's not crosstalk, but when a person wants to share, they can get everything out that they need to get out. Al-Anon has published many helpful books that are useful to those in this situation, like Courage to Change and Path to Recovery, and many more. But the most important resource, again, is these support groups, through which many can find healing, comfort, and solutions to the stress of caring for someone in need of help. It's not going to address the needs of the alcoholic in terms of solving their problems, but it does help you as a caregiver. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. The function of this organization, which has local representation and activities, just like Al-Anon, is to help people who are trying to support a family member or friend with diagnosed or undiagnosed mental health issues. The National NAMI Helpline is made very much available, and it can be reached at their the address. I'll put it in the chat. I'll put that information in the chat. NAMI offers national and local service and provides education, resources, and the newest updates in medical services, medical news about mental health, as Kathy was talking about, how new discoveries are always being made about the brain, which help us to understand more about factors in mental health. Most metropolitan areas have NAMI support groups that meet regularly, weekly and biweekly, facilitated by a trained volunteer who has experience within their own family of dealing with mental health issues. The best way to find out more is to identify a local NAMI group and participate in support groups. I attended a family-to-family 8-week class that is provided at no cost, and I learned a great deal to help me work more effectively as a caregiver, especially in how to understand my loved ones' mental health issues and how to communicate better. Also, we're going to provide a book list on our website, and there are countless books on the subject of mental and emotional illness. The books on this list will help caregivers and sometimes those who suffer from mental illness. And here's just a few. The first one is, I am not sick. I don't need your help. How to help someone to accept treatment. And this one is really helpful for many, many people who suffer from addiction or mental health issues, are in denial, and they don't see things clearly, and will not accept help. So this author really helped. What he has to say really helps a lot. The Language of Letting Go by Melody Beattie, Surviving Life with an Addict or Someone Who's Suffering from Mental Health Issues. It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin, Understanding the Genetic Inheritance of Mental and Emotional Disturbances. And I like this one a lot, Stop Walking on Eggshells by Paul T. Mason and Randy Krieger. And this book is subtitled, Taking Your Life Back When Someone You Care About Has Borderline Personality Disorder. This is one, this is a very good resource, and has some humor in it as well, as you can tell from the title. So those are just some of the resources that I'm familiar with. And we'll be adding to this list to help people find ways to deal with the situation, this kind of situation. And in conclusion, let me encourage you, if this is your situation, or if you know someone who's struggling with this, as a caregiver or someone who has some mental health issues, reach out and get the help that's available. And that's all I'll share about today. And thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mrs. Ritchie. I shared the resources just at the end of her talk there. We will send that out to you. We'll put that on the website. There is a lot of stigma about drug addiction, alcohol use, but we're beginning to realize that it's more common. Again, it's not just in any socioeconomic group. It's not in any location. People often say to me, well, if I just go to Australia or New Zealand, everything will be okay. New Zealand has one of the highest suicide rates for teenagers in the world. So it's not a matter of going to any location or being with any particular person, but it is a matter of understanding the issues and getting help when help is necessary, and being able to move forward. And especially in faith communities, we need to be more aware that there has to be a lot more understanding. Okay, let me see any questions here. So the resources we will again send out. Matt Goldberg was just asking about the resources. One of them is, she just put in the chat line there, and could it, for each of the presenters, before we go back into the breakout room, please put your information in the chat so that everybody can connect to that. And then at the end, once we come back from the breakout session, I'll be talking about upcoming workshops that I'll be conducting in Belize next week, and then in Honduras in a couple of months' time. And there will be opportunities for an internship with the Center for Leadership and Character Education. We have educators coming from Kenya, Ivory Coast, and Senegal that will be coming to DC and to Maryland. And we're looking for 18 to 35-year-olds who can work with those young people. And a part of dealing with how to create healthy models is we have to help young people be more self-actualized, and that's partly what we're trying to do with the whole character education initiative. Okay, each of the email addresses are going in there now. So Pierre, could you put us back into the breakout rooms, please? Okay, welcome back, everyone. The curveball that I threw at all the coordinators was, what age are we in? And the age that we're in is, I think, a transitionary period where we have so many issues with mental health, so many issues with mass shooting, so many issues with a lot of different issues. And the good news is we're beginning to see that science is beginning to understand more about spirituality and the elements of spirituality. And there's a more confluence of connecting between those two different elements. So different email addresses are going in the chat there. As I mentioned, there are a lot of different programs that are going to be offered. Sandra, do you want to talk about Gavin Hamnett's program that he's beginning? Do you know enough information on that to talk about that? You're muted. You're muted. You're muted. There you go.
Here we are. I don't have enough information on it. I was hoping he would be able to be on himself. I'm going to ask my husband, who's also on the session, if he might have the information that we need. I know
Right.
he's been sending out information for a bit.
Right. So what I know of it is it's a 6-week program, and we'll put more information. Kathy, do you know more on the program?
Not at this time, but I'll be speaking with Gavin this week,
Okay.
and I can send it to you, and you can post it.
Okay, very good. And
That would
John,
be perfect.
if you have any information, please just post it in the chat there. On that program, I know it's a 6-week program beginning, I think, next month
Next month, September. Yeah.
in September. I think it's daily on a Saturday. The other programs that we have coming up, I'll be doing a 3-day character education workshop from Monday in Belize. That's for educators at Samuel Haynes Academy of Excellence. It's an after-school program. That will be on the Zoom. I will endeavor to give you the chat for that. Dr. Durst is now leaving us. Thank you, Dr. Durst, for your participation.
That's Isaac, my son.
Oh, Isaac is leaving. Okay, thank you, Isaac. And after that workshop, when I return to the States, I will be working with Philbert Seeker. As I mentioned, we are planning a character education and leadership program. It was scheduled for the middle of September, but because of elections in Kenya, we will be postponing that. And that will be for educators in Washington, D.C. We'll be doing a program on leadership and climate change and other issues in D.C. with some of the UN organizations. And then we'll be doing a business leadership and character education program in Washington, D.C. So Matt Goldberg will be talking to you soon about that. And after that, I'll be returning to Honduras for a 3-day workshop in Spanish. So any of you people who are bilingual, please contact me about that. And then our next program for the Center for Leadership and Character Education will be focused on leadership enhancement. So that's all I have. Pierre, do you want to mention any programs that you have coming up? You mentioned a program the other day.
I don't have anything right now.
Good. Okay.
Um,
All right. So I'll go around. Final comments, Dr. Lowen.
It's been such a full morning that I don't know where to start. We did bring up in our group the fact that when we are looking at the difficulties that people have, we need to look at them at an emotional issue as we would look at a physical issue. If I break my leg, I seek help. If I am emotionally going through something, I need to have that same sense. It's a broken leg, but it's in my head, or it's a broken leg, but it's in the way that I view the world. So that is how we go, we learn, we strengthen, and we're stronger than ever. As
Thank you.
well, that our parents also need to sometimes parent ourselves as we are working with our children and our grandchildren and our moms and dads.
Thank you very much. Dr. Durst, closing comments or from a report from our breakout?
Well, I feel that we've gained so much, and we have to follow through with a number of things that were discussed. It was a very rich seminar this morning, and I thank you for setting it up and for the presenters. And I've made some notes to follow up certain things. That's what I do with a workshop like this, taking notes for several points that I'm going to follow up this week. And that's where the real value comes in, because I can gain greater depth in terms of what I heard. And I thank everybody.
Thank you very much, Dr. Durst. Dr. Winings?
No, just thank you all for your participation and the breakout groups. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I just put my email in the chat. Poppy Ritchie, any feedback from your discussions in the breakout?
Definitely very inspired by a couple of activists in our group, Donna Avery and Sharon Pace, who are on the front line in their school and their communities. And, in response to the question about how to impact the community, I suggest you contact them. They're doing amazing work. So I'm very inspired by the people who came to participate in this and also the speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all, especially Reverend Sandra Lowen, Dr. Winings, Dr. Durst, Poppy Ritchie, and a special thanks to Pierre Beauregard, who has the technical expertise to put all this together well beyond my level of being technologically challenged. And we will be doing another program possibly in October. So we hope to see you soon. There will be a recording of this event that you will receive within the next 24 hours. And thank you all very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.